Hi, welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. My name is Austin Chadwick and co-host is Chris Lucian. And today, excited to have back a special guest, Kyle Griffin. And we got some great topics lined up. So diving deep potentially into TDD as a progressive practice rather than just being mostly test first. So we got some cool stuff to unpack there. And then if time permits, we'll talk about goal before method, maintainability chefs, if I'm reading that right. And should you use TDD in prototypes, and maybe some agility, hypothesis, centricity stuff. So looking forward to at least getting into some of this. And but before we do, Kyle, can you give an introduction for yourself?
I'm Kyle. I have worked at a bunch of places. Currently, I'm working at a place called Nimbus, uh, banking startup. And my thing is software maintainability. I want software to be easy to change, roughly. And I've been chasing that goal for 25, 30 years now.
Nice. Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, welcome. It's good to have you back. TDD is a huge passion of mine. I know it's for Chris too. And so I'm going to misinterpret you on purpose just to make a jarring start to the discussion. So Kyle, are you saying that TDD does not have to be test first? Come on, man.
Okay, that's a good lead. So here's my line. TDD has a bunch of value propositions that you carry around in TDD. I'm a maintainability guy. So when I think about TDD, when I say what's the primary value proposition you're getting out of it, my value proposition is the refactor step in the TDD loop. The fact that you hit the refactor step of your code every 5 minutes, that is fundamentally transformative to how 98% of people write code. The other 2% who naturally refactor their code every 5 minutes, okay, whatever. Why we're not talking about that. We're talking about the other 98%, right? So if we're looking at that, and I know TDD has multiple values, right? Some of the value is in getting a specification. And a lot of people get a lot of value out of the specification nature of TDD. But if you go look at original TDD, right? Kent Beck, TDD by example, 2000 and whatever, early, right? You read the first 100 pages, which is one example of doing TDD on a currency thing. What do you see? You see micro step TDD test. That took 2 minutes to write the test. You see code. That took 2 minutes to write the code. You test, fail. Code, pass. Refactor, check. No, this one's fine. Test, fail. And so the question of where are you getting the win if you're chasing the maintainability value of TDD, which I think is enormous and what I care about most. I'd rather do code, test, refactor on a 5-minute cycle than test, code, refactor on a 30-minute cycle.
Gotcha. So
because
go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, maybe you can elaborate. Is that because the tests are taking too long to write, or like what's the why is it a 30-minute cycle on the refactor?
But have you seen that before? Because I have. I have seen people go in and go, okay, I'm going to do TDD. And they go, okay, now I'm going to walk in and I'm going to build a 14-point mocking here.
Right. Yeah, okay. That's what I thought you were getting at. Yeah.
Right? I am going to execute 14 steps, and then I am going to check to see if it came out right. Right? I've walked into organizations and said, hey, do you do TDD? And they say, sure, we do. And by that, they mean I do unit tests sometimes. Yeah. Right? And I say, cool, can you show me your tests? And they do. And they say, okay, here's our tests. And they run. I go, great. How often? Well, let me show you. And so they run their 8-unit tests on 50,000 lines of code. And the 8-unit tests, each one of them has to spin up the entire Spring environment.
Right. Right.
Not once, but each time.
Yeah.
And then you call through to this thing, and your unit tests run in 5 minutes. The 8-unit tests take 5 minutes to run. And so you're going, okay, what? You're not getting any of the maintainability value of this. None.
Yeah.
Right?
You're often just putting a hurdle in front of yourself from the testing that you're going to do afterward, the manual testing you're going to do after.
Yeah. You're effectively doing manual tests, but you're doing it in an automated fashion, so it's extra slow.
Yeah.
Right? Right?
Gotcha.
And so rethinking what matters in TDD. So I'm just going to give you a quick run through of what I said, right? I gave 10 lines for TDD. I'll mail you a slideshow if you want. Here's the deal. It's test-driven development. It's not code and test. What I'm doing is doing tests to make my development process better. Right? If
Sure.
you're doing the, go ahead, Chris.
No, I say sure. Yeah.
Right? That's step one, is I am using tests to improve how I write code, not doing tests because I should have tests. That's a big deal. I think that's more important than where you put to the tests.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's better to have actual tests that actually verify things and lower code coverage than high code coverage.
Yes,
and
that verifies
not be able to find the bug. Right.
Not that we've seen that before, but
yeah.
Second,
So yeah, I think I've seen different types of environments. I've certainly seen that, or even like sometimes I'll have a visitor or somebody kind of looking at the team being like, oh wow, we're doing testing completely differently, and that's why we're struggling with it or something. So there are the environments that are like more extreme programming environments, and then there's like cargo cult extreme programming. Maybe that's what you're getting at, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, this is like, extreme programming is great, so let's just do it. But the intention is completely misinterpreted when the implementation happens.
So that's my second topic that I really want to get to, but let's do this. Okay, so here's my line. Number 2 on the TDD promises. It's test-driven development, and then you have a cycle. Legitimately, test code, test code, test code.
Right.
You go back and forth. Have you run into this? I've run into this. Hey, I'm going to do TDD. So I'm going to sit down and write 8 tests.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And like legitimately, there's value in that, right? And I would call that DDD value proposition. You are specifying the goal before you write the code. That's a real value. But if you want the test-driven development part of it, the D in test-driven development, it's the cycle.
Right.
And the cycle is king. And then you want a small cycle, right? We talked about that already. I want a 5-minute cycle. I like TCR because it kicks you in the butt and makes you do a small cycle.
Yeah, it gives most developers a heart attack, I think.
Well, because they haven't thought in the small enough cycle. If you're only doing 2 lines of test and 2 lines of code, then TCR is beautiful. If you're not doing that, then 2 lines of test and 2 lines of code is how you make TCR survivable.
Right. Yeah. I wonder, anybody who's listening, respond in the comments. How many people have heard of TCR before or not? But TCR stands for test, commit, revert, which is the test fails and you're back to before you wrote the test in the code automatically. And there's some plugins for it now too. So if you didn't know, that's what we're talking about.
It's an awesome thing. I don't know if you want to do it as your production method, but if you're learning how to do micro steps, TCR is the meanest thing around to make you do micro steps. I love it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think, oh, go ahead, Kyle. Yeah.
No, okay. I have more steps besides micro steps.
Nice. Please proceed.
Um, so the third thing is when you're adding, you add tests and code together, right? It's not you add a bunch of tests and then you add a bunch of code. You're
Right.
doing small cycles, and when you add more code, you add more tests. When you add more tests, you add more code. It's like they go together in a way that you're running the micro test. You make a change, you run all the tests. You make a change, you run all the tests. You make a change, you run all the tests. And by the way, you have to add tests as you add new functionality. Cool, that matters. My experience in TDD is what kills TDD. Number one, what will guarantee you that nobody does it, even if they say they're doing it? Your tests take 5 seconds or more to run.
Right.
Number absolute one on my list. If your tests don't run in 5 seconds, nobody's doing what we want them to.
Yeah. And,
Right?
that's an interesting thing too, because in some languages, even the compile or interpolation step happens and it takes more than 5 seconds. So running your tests after that even takes longer. Um, so that would even mean, further decoupling so that your compile step is less than that, or you choose a language in which you can write tests in that much faster. That will execute the tests that much faster.
Yeah, interpreted languages.
Right.
JavaScript, Python, pick your favorite.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, I think that might be part of the reason for some of Python's high popularity right now, is that, yeah, I've certainly seen people working in something that has to compile versus working in Python, and the compile step seems to be getting longer over time, or maybe we just need better computers, but more often.
Yeah. Well, so better computers, yeah. I would think you might even want to run and I haven't run into a case where I need to do this yet, but I think you want to run. I have certainly seen cases where we build too big of deployable units, and our
Right.
too big deployable unit means that it takes 10 seconds to compile. And if you're taking 10 seconds to compile, I legitimately can't run my unit tests 3 times in a minute, which is
Right.
fairly standard for me. To check,
Yeah.
hey, did I break something? Did I break something?
It's kind of like, this is also something I've been like thinking about a little bit more recently, and sometimes I think that it's actually the difficulty of building the pipeline and infrastructure as code. Like as soon as somebody is like, "Oh, I need to decouple a library," I think people are like, "Actually, I'm not, because I don't want to make the pipeline for it." Right? I don't want to build the package and then put it in a package library and then go get it from the package. And so I do think that there's something that we as a development community need to think about making that whole process easier, so that people are not so afraid to build a new library into their build process. I think there's something to that.
I mean, the entire build process, right? There's so many things that are currently all custom setup things.
Mhm.
Okay, are we going to use the same Airbnb rules for our JavaScript linting? Right?
Right.
This is a new thing, right? So, or I'm pulling in some code that isn't following these good rules. So, do I need to tone down my rules so it doesn't give me 7 million errors on my
Right.
code base, right? Yeah, I think pipelining and making a clean, smooth, standardized pipeline, kind of like what Spring Boot did for how do you deploy Java web projects, I think that kind of thing would be enormously valuable.
Right. Yeah. It's just like, we're gonna make a new library, and now there's a pipeline and a package distribution. You can go get it easily, blah, blah, blah. Right? Like, some way of making that easier. But I feel like every tool that the industry adds to pipelines and CI/CD and stuff like that make things more and more complicated over time. And then it creates more anxiety and fear around decoupling, which, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll throw in there that I no surprise coming from the mob mentality co-host, but the I think TDD has the same problem as anything else that's very complicated and nuanced, and there's many ways to do it right, and there's probably more ways to do it poorly. So it's like it's an aspect of software development, product development. There's 100 other things like this where there's a lot of nuance. And in my experience, releasing people in isolation after they've seen a video or two or done a certification or a training is going to lead to all these problems both of you have mentioned quite dramatically. However, if there is someone who has the nuance and the experience, and you can do social programming with them, then you can, run micro experiments. Sure, let's see how it goes to write 8 tests first, or let's see how it goes to write, 500 lines of test setup code. And they'll be like, okay, do you want to see a different way to do TDD? And then you show them the, the short feedback version, whether that's TCR or something else. And then you can reflect on those 2 experiences and then pick one and for your development going forward. So I feel like anything like TDD is just going to suffer huge amounts of semantic diffusion unless it has something like social programming to back it. Yeah.
So second time I've been here, and I may have said this the first time, but
yes,
my experience of code, if you want good code, you do social programming.
Yeah.
Next question. The second favorite thing for me is TDD.
Yes.
The third favorite thing is having a good pipeline that will support you. And I sometimes build the good pipeline before I get to the TDD and social programming.
Right.
But social programming is the overwhelming win for me. I don't even know how to think about how you get teams to do better code without social programming.
You kind of remind me that there was a time where I was visiting another company, and they were kind of showing me around with their processes. And one thing that came up was like CI/CD pipelines, the complication. And so what I told them was, I was like, oh, by the way, whenever I start a new project, often I will deploy to production when the application doesn't do anything, right? So it's like whatever generate step and then deploy, and then I'll start working on it. So very much that like how set up your pipeline before doing the work. A few years later, the leader of that group was, contacts me. He's like, "Hey, I took that one little thing you said," and I was like, "I don't even remember saying that." And he's like, "It really like turned everything around and all." So it was really interesting. So I think that's like a much more important step than a lot of people realize. I think a lot of people get to their deployment and don't understand their dependencies very well, and then try and figure all that stuff out. Yeah.
I've gotten to a point where I'm still a super aggressive old school XP guy. Look, pairing, TDD, that's what matters. If you do something else, that's cool, but that's what matters. But the problem is, do the pipeline first, right? Yeah. Even though those are the things that matter to me, getting your deployment to work with nothing, the hello world deployment, and then build forward is huge.
Yeah, and understanding what went wrong, like earlier, right? And so I think a lot of people have lost a lot of time on that, like, oh, we're gonna deploy to prod now that we've TDD'd our whole thing, and then it's like, okay, but deploying it actually, putting it on another machine or something like that, it catches you or something. So
yeah,
I've seen it and I've heard of it, and happening. So
yeah,
integration is always the hard problem.
Right.
If you code A and B, and then you get A and B to work together, which is the hard part? Oh, working together. I don't care what your problem is.
That's the hard part with humans too, is working together. So
yeah, I've had enough of you, Chris. I'm leaving this meeting now. Humans are difficult. No more humans. So to return to your original question, Kyle, I actually really like this kind of philosophical question of, let's just say, have in your mind TDD, well understood, well practiced, and you're picking apart the different pieces of it and which parts are the most important. It does hurt my soul a little bit to take away the test first part of it, but I am persuaded that you're right, that even if you take away the test first part of it, but you keep, like you said, a robust refactor step and a robust feedback loop, my soul will hurt every few minutes doing that, not the test first, but you're right. I think that those parts are more important, right? Because if you just keep like, if you, I think that's what you did early in the conversation, is you inverse. Well, let's make the feedback loop really slow and let's not do refactoring and do test first. Is going to be a terrible experience. Where if I drop the test first and keep the other two things, the refactor and the fast feedback, my experience would be way better. I would still like to have all three, but I agree with you. If I had to just pick two, I guess you can force me into it, you know.
Right. And so that's what I'm saying. And there's so many people who think, oh, TDD means test first, and they're not paying attention to, no. There's a test code loop, and there's a separate refactor loop that you jump back and forth with.
Right.
Refactor test, refactor test, refactor test. That loop, like I like that loop better than the test code loop.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do run into a lot of people, especially like earlier career, where it's just I'm too afraid to refactor, or I don't want to break it because I got it working and I'm not going to touch it again afterwards. So the safety net aspect of the testing process, well, you know, I guess code coverage and, you know, good assertions, I think allows you to build confidence in people, or at least allow people to take risks. But yeah, it's, you know, you hear these stories of people in environments where they're like, oh, we can't hire, it'll take us 6 months to have them make their first change to the code base and stuff. And so, you know, like a big thing about, you know, testing well and often for me is like just onboarding somebody else, allowing somebody to move on to something else without having the nagging anxiety that somebody else is going to break the thing that they built. You know, all these sorts of things. So, you know, I certainly think that the confidence in refactoring is a very good measure of saying like, are we going in the right direction? Is this happening well, right?
Yeah, 100% with you, right? I have argued at this point when I'm asked to give financial calculations, I say, okay, what's the cost of hiring a new developer and getting them up to speed?
Right.
That's what social programming kills first.
Right.
Right? Like, rewrite that number as 0.
Yeah. They commit code and push it to production on the first day.
First day, first hour, we're in and we're working, and this whole onboarding thing is no longer a thing.
Yeah.
That's huge. So I'm going to make my most controversial statement about the TDD claim. I had a couple other things to call out, but I don't need them. My most controversial statement about TDD in terms of test first. I think that walking into a TDD cycle with a mini plan, like, hey, what are we going to do? Right? I think we should go in there and we should refactor this thing because it's not doing that. And you do a quick discussion of your plan and a quick sketch of your design. I think that is more important than the test first part.
Yes.
Right? And nobody does that unless they've actually, like, if you read the TDD by example, Kent lists at the very beginning, hey, here's my 15 things that I plan to do, roughly in order.
Yeah.
Right? And nobody thinks about that as part of TDD. And honestly, I'd rather have that plus the fast cycle plus the refactor step than I'd have test first.
There's like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, and Maslow's hierarchy of TDD now. Right? And that's a part that nobody thinks about even.
I like it. Yeah.
Part of TDD. But all of us who've been doing it forever, like, the only reason I don't do that is because I did it in my head, and I assume you did the same thing in your head, and we said words and agreed.
So there is like you know, in our social programming experiences, I can name a couple of instances that I'm reminded of. Like, one is I think when people were making that assumption and not necessarily verbalizing it, then it sort of became a problem with the team, especially with like quieter team members too. And so there was like a practice of everyone draws that we kind of adopted, where it's like, okay, here's where we're going, and here's the drawing of the change that we're about to make. And then another thing that I saw in a few instances in the past has been like this idea that red green refactor is, you know, I've reframed it for people as refactor red green refactor. It's like, and that's part of like the make it easy to change and then make it easy to
Yeah.
change, make the easy change afterwards. Because I would just I would join a group of people doing social programming, and they would be adding a test for something that was incredibly difficult to add to the architecture because there was no thought of what the refactoring step would be when you were green, when you just pulled the code for the first time. So I'm like, it's not red green refactor, it's refactor red green refactor, and that kind of got people over that hurdle. Because yeah, I don't think enough, and maybe that's to your point, is I don't think enough thought goes into making it easy to change before making the easy change sometimes, right?
I have, it took me a while to get to that point, but like I hang out with Llewellyn and he says that, and
Yeah.
then Kent's got his tidy first book,
Mm,
right? And so it's pretty central. On my list of 10 things, I skipped a couple. Tidy first was one of the ones I skipped.
yeah.
So I'm 100% there with you. Example, today, yesterday, I started yesterday. One of my team members joined me and said, "Hey, can you show me how to test this? Because I don't really know how to do the unit testing." And so we're doing our daily lunch of, hey, we're going to write code better together.
Yeah.
And so my friend shows up and she says, "Hey, how do we test this?" And I say, "You know what? Step one, we auto refactor. We use the dang tool to pull out a chunk of code from your 300 line method
Yeah.
that is testable."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
It wasn't doing TDD, but we had 300 lines of code of
Yeah.
big, ugly mess. You can't test that. Like, you'll honestly, it's 4 hours to write the mocks to be able to test a thing,
Right.
Mhm.
right? So the first thing we do is we do tool assisted automated safe refactorings and we pull the thing out. And so we've cleaned it up enough so that it's testable. I want to go one past what you said, though, Chris,
Yeah.
right? I'm here for the tidying. It's test-driven development, not development and testing. So the tidying is more important to me than the testing. The testing is there to kind of support my tidying,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
I want the extracted methods. I want the cleanup, and the test is what lets me do that.
Right. Yeah. It's the safety net while while you're doing the fun activity of the high wire balancing act.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I totally dig it. And I think that that's quite persuasive. And on returning a bit to your most controversial statement on TDD, you heard it here, folks, on the Mom Mentality Show. What's interesting about that is the mini plan before you start. And I've kind of have seen that go off the rails. And I think with social programming, it's really, really obvious when it goes off the rails because it's kind of, TDD can go off the rails, social programming can go off the rails if you're not doing something like strong navigation, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so, oh, it's my turn to navigate or drive. And instead of saying, starting high level and go low level, it's just, hey, implement flux capacitor and the parabola on line 5. And then the driver's trying to do it and they have no idea what's going on or why. And then the next driver or navigator shows up and then they start, navigating the opposite of that, so there was no high level chat at first. But when there is proper strong style navigation, starting with high level navigation, you'll be like, oh, even if you don't have like a formal mini plan process, like navigator A starts and says high level navigation is this, and someone's like, oh, is that our direction? And then you figure out your direction, you have a mini plan, and then you can go into the medium to low level of what the
Yeah.
first test is or what the first automated refactoring is to make testing safe or
It's like those
whatever.
really senior level programmers try mobbing for the first time, and they're like, they're like, I hate navigating curly braces, and it's like, okay, well, Are you always navigating curly braces, or is there a higher level of abstraction? So
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So, but that's a thing, is one of the problems I have, and I've run into this in architecture forever, right? You go in 15 years ago, I was hanging out, I got a buddy named Babani, right? And Babani and I would hang out, and we, like, he's an architect and I'm a senior lead dev type guy. And we get together and we go, okay, how are we going to do this? And Babani says, well, I think we should do it this way. And I look at it and I go, I think we should do it this way. Literally, every time we disagreed, it was a disagreement over goals, right?
Mm.
If you've got two people who've been in a domain, like we've both been in Java for a decade at that point, you know how things are done in this domain, right? You don't have to talk even hardly to get a commonality. And so what you're doing is saying, okay, with enough domain expertise, you said in the social programming domain,
Yeah.
this whole planning thing, you can assume a lot of plan because you've built a shared context, right?
Yes.
I don't have to talk barely. If somebody else has read Gang of Four Patterns, I don't
Yeah.
have to talk to them about how we're going to solve it. Adapter, good, we'll go.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And so there's a whole bunch of things that if you get enough shared context, you don't need the explicitness.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Then you don't even have to go low level navigation, so to speak, right? Yeah. You can, yeah. Someday Chris and I will just speak in Latin, and
Yes.
then, either Chris's will make it so, or a bot will. And
I've been, I've been in mobs where I say strategy pattern, and then there's a freeze, and it's like, okay, well, I'm using a common vocabulary that
yes.
is based off of these resources here, so I'll navigate it lower level, but it's something that if we had this all as in a vocabulary together, then no one would bat an eye when and then I've been in the opposite situation, like you said, where it's just like, hey, this pattern should go in here, and
Yep.
the driver is like just starts typing away while the rest of the mob has a high level navigation or a high level discussion about what's next, right?
Yeah.
So I heard you say the word goal. So that triggered me that we might be transitioning topics potentially, Kyle. So what are your thoughts on goal before method?
So my highest level thought on this right now is the reason Agile doesn't work is nobody agreed on a goal. Right? I'm here, and literally since I found XP in 2000, a couple years before then even, right? I was Larman's object-oriented stuff in the late 90s. Okay, I'm here. What am I here to do? I am here to make this code easy to change so that I can solve the customer's problem as the customer's problem changes, because that customer won't keep their problem still for me, right? I'm here to do that. I'll go back a few years ago. I was once upon a time working for a director, and that director's bonus, like literally 30% of their annual salary, came from delivering fixed requirements on time.
Right.
I say, I want to solve the customer's real problem. And he says, I don't care.
Right. Incentive structures are a very powerful motivator.
Yes.
Right?
No matter how poorly you plan them out.
Yes. Yeah. I've run into that before too, where the incentive structures, where you're trying to do the lean thing, or the lean or quote unquote agile thing of solving a real customer's problem, which in fact might generate lots of money for the company. But the system incentivizes something else other than that. And so you feel like, wait a second, I'm doing this for the company and I'm doing this for the customer, yet everyone is fighting me. trying to stop me from doing this. And so, yeah,
Right.
I've definitely been there before and been quite confused. Yes.
But like I'm not sure that it's been a discussion. Like recently, we've been getting into this agile fight, but I've been through this. Pick another company I was at that I'm not going to name at this point. We go in and it's like, okay, what's the goal? And the problem that I keep running into is somebody walks in and tries to apply a method, Scrum, XP, pick your favorite, and the management goals, the things they are concerned about, the things they are incented towards, the things that matter to them, the things that impact their promotion, even if they're not part of the incentives, right? Those things don't line up with, and like, I can talk about what does the user need. I can talk about what does the customer need, whether or not it's the same thing as what the user needs. I can talk about what's the profitability for our organization. And if I were betting, 5% of all decisions I've seen made in an organization have been made around one of those 3 points, right? The rest of them are, look, we can't break anything. Like I did some time working at a major online retailer, right? That major online retailer code freezes at the beginning of October because literally the only thing that matters to the profitability of their business is that nothing goes wrong near Black Friday.
Right.
50% of their total annual sales occur in the 4 days after Black Friday.
Yep.
Right? And so you start going, I would like things easy to change. Code freeze in October.
Yeah, for sure.
But we would be better code freeze in October. Right? The what we're trying to solve in Agile, in craftsmanship, in DevOps is a problem that isn't even interesting to a lot of folks in the software industry. I don't know how that works. It confuses me emotionally. It makes my soul hurt, like Austin said.
Yeah.
Right? But I keep running into this. No. We haven't established a goal, and you've given a method. And you know what happens when you establish a method and don't tell me the goal? You corrupt this method to support whatever goal you actually have.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And in that Black Friday context, I mean, it might be that the goal is to be agile, 3/4 of the year, right? And then have a stint of waterfall behind it or something along those lines. But yeah, I don't think that there's anything that's highly absolute, even agility, but certainly being flexible in, flexibility is important, especially when it comes in handy, right? So Black Friday is happening and, oh, our pipeline doesn't work because of the code freeze. Like that, and there's a bug that was in there from 6 months ago that we had no idea was there, right? So like that scenario, a lot of these practices can still support the, you just block the pipeline for a while or something. But I think that yeah, absolutely. Alignment on those goals is incredibly important, and awareness of those things. But sometimes I think, especially high level executives, they often don't know the full impacts of their choices on a system, right? So it's like, I read on Forbes that Agile is awesome, so we're going to put it in our company. And it's like, oh, we a lot of our processes underlying or other directives or incentive structures just don't allow agility to be formed. And then agility gets a bad name because everybody's like, it just doesn't work. And so I think this year I've heard more doubt for agile than I think I've ever had in my career. So I find that pretty interesting as well.
I'll cite Jem Jelly, a British Scrum Master guy, LinkedIn here. Look, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna establish Scrum here. What are we gonna do with Scrum? Well, every 2 weeks, we're gonna see how far we've gone by following the plan. What's Scrum built to do? Like literally, Scrum is built to change the plan when you find out that that's not what the user needs. That's what the process is built for, right?
Right.
You can go look at the historical documents and see that, or you can just study the process and see what it's good at, right? Right?
Yeah.
You can do intellectual anthropology or real history. And in both cases, what Scrum is good at is we're going to build for 2 weeks to let the devs have room. And then we're going to show the user and change direction based on what we learn, right? That's the fundamental foundation of Scrum. So when you try and do Scrum, but you haven't decided we're going to change direction, it's just
Scrum or
like
fall.
when you're firmly opposed to changing direction,
Yeah.
what are you doing?
Yeah.
Right? You've failed. And I've seen that so many times where the goal, what we're trying to achieve and the method we choose to achieve it with just don't even, they're opposed to one another. And strangely, then somebody complains and says, oh, this method doesn't work. For the goal, you're right, it doesn't.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, nice. You know, what you're saying, it reminds me of, it's kind of the inverse of the Deming quote, a goal without a method is cruel, right? Because you say like, oh, you shall release, 50 times a day to production, but they have no knowledge of the things needed for continuous delivery. That could be quite cruel. And I almost kind of hear you saying a method without a goal is also equally as cruel or more cruel or something like that. Yeah.
Horrid, right? Because what happens is you substitute some existing goal that doesn't fit the method. It's like saying, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I have I'm doing some house building. I have to screw in 100 screws. So we're going to use a method. Well, what method are you going to use? Well, let's do a study. And like 10 weeks later, they come back and discover that we're going to use the method hammer to solve our attachment problems. But it doesn't match my goal of dealing with the screws, right? Hammers are fine for some goals, but they're not very good at screws, right? And we keep, like literally, I've gotten to a point where almost everything we talk about, hey, we have a problem. I go, I think your goal doesn't match your method, or I think you decided method before you decided goal. Right? Quick silliness. Isn't that the original line for Agile stories too? This whole theory of story is you tell me the goal before you tell me what your guess on how to do it is.
Yes.
Right. Well, but except 98% of the stories I've seen in the wild are here's a solution without even a specification of a goal. I want to be able, I want to have a button there so I can push it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. I know we're getting close to time, Chris, but I remember, being in the position. It was like a from scratch Agile Scrum transformation many years back for me. But I remember being in the room and asking the question like, okay, so this is, you said you're working on a story. All right, what about the so that? What about the so what? And then just getting crickets and kind of like, well, because so-and-so said, who's 2 levels up. Can we put that in the Agile story as so what? And I'm like, well, and so, yeah,
you gotta add because the hippo said so.
Because the hippo said so, yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we are at about time. So, Kyle, do you have anything that you'd like to plug or share before we sign off here?
I'm going to come back and repeat and say, hey, look, if you're going to do something, figure out what you're trying to achieve with it before you decide to do it. Right? Otherwise, it probably doesn't work.
Well said. Well said. So thanks for being on the show, Kyle. And To our audience, if you know somebody who maybe is implementing a method without a goal, maybe it's a good episode to share with them. Just don't tell them that's why you shared it. And, please like, subscribe, share, all the things, comment, chat with us. And thanks again and listen, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Adios. See ya.